If you're confused about all the different terms that are thrown around in the marine electronics industry, like AIS, GPS, sonar, MFDs, chart plotters, and unsure about what those things do and if you need them on your boat, then stick around for this video because I'm going to explain them to you. So here's an outline of what we're going to cover in this video. First, we're going to talk about the MFDs, then we're going to talk about sonar, then radar, then AIS, and then networking. To make things easy to understand and follow, I'm going to be using this Onwa KM8 series chart plotter as the example. Onwa is the sponsor of this video, so if you're interested in any of the products that you see, definitely take a look in the description box where you can find their website. I just want to take a minute now and welcome you to the In-Depth Sonar YouTube channel if this is your first time checking us out. My name is Lauren and I'm the host of the channel, and you might be asking yourself, well, who are you and why should I be listening to you? Well, I've spent the last 22 years in the marine electronics industry, and in that time I've gained a lot of knowledge on the various products and how all the systems go together. So on this channel, I share that knowledge with you through these videos. So if you find it helpful, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next video. The first component you need for your electronics is your MFD, and that's what this is here now. There's so many different terms that these displays are referred to. I personally like MFD because that's what this is. It's a multi-function display. You'll also hear these called GPS, mapping units, chart plotters, and all kinds of other different terms that refer to the display itself. So in this case, I have the KM8 series of chart plotters. And Onwa, like most manufacturers, will have sub-versions of this. This particular unit is the KM8C. The name itself of the chart plotter can actually give you a lot of information about it. First, KM is the series it belongs to. 8 is the 8-inch diagonal screen size, and then C is the variation of this particular MFD. So in this particular case, the C stands for combo, so it's a sonar and GPS combination unit. That means we have a transducer port in the back of the unit, so we can plug a transducer in to get depth. For example, if we just had the KM8, that would be GPS only, and then we would have to add external modules for sonar. We'll get into that a little bit more in the video though. Onwa also makes a KM8A and KM8X, and those are two other variations in addition to the C model. We'll cover those as we go along in this video. The most basic function of just about any MFD unit out there is GPS, and that stands for Global Positioning System. That will use satellite triangulation to put you on a latitude-longitude grid, and then you'll be able to see yourself in relation to waypoints and routes that you've entered into the display. This is where we get a lot of the different terms that MFDs are referred to. We hear them being referred to as plotter or chart plotter, and with the most basic form of GPS, that would be considered a plotter display. The GPS would just allow you to plot your course in a latitude and longitude grid that you could even take waypoints from a paper map and transfer them over into the unit to create a route that you wanted to follow. You'd have no mapping or charting, as it's called in the nautical world, for reference. People often confuse GPS and charting as one thing, but GPS is that latitude and longitude grid with satellite triangulation of your position. The charting is just a layer that's on top of that that provides detailed information such as spot soundings, marker buoys, marina information, and all of those types of things. So you're able to add an electronic chart through a micro SD card to these units. This one has a card slot on the side of it, which will allow us to put the high detailed electronic charts onto the unit, and these charts can cover a really wide area. You can pretty well get all of North America onto one of these cards now. So here's an example of a Navionics electronic chart card. This will then be inserted into the unit to give us the high detailed information. That has to remain in the unit in order for those charts to be displayed. Now this particular Onwa chart plotter does have built-in maps, and the mapping in the Great Lakes region where I'm from is actually quite good on it, but I do find the external cards typically will offer better detail overall. These are also a lot easier to update, and this particular Navionics Plus chart has daily updates. So when you're looking at an MFD to purchase, it's always a good idea to research the charts that you'll be using and what kind of updates are available for those charts. Now we talked a little bit earlier about satellite triangulation, and that's done through a GPS antenna. A lot of units will have built-in antennas, but this Onwa unit comes with an external antenna. Now, there's a little bit of an advantage to having an external antenna. You can mount that up so high somewhere on the boat to where it has a perfect view of the sky. If you had an internal antenna and you wanted to mount this under a cabin, the accuracy may go down if it would lock onto satellites at all. So having an external GPS antenna, if you have a larger boat that has an enclosed cabin, is always a good idea. Sonar is the most popular option most people will add to their chart plotter. In fact, I really recommend that you purchase one that has a transducer port right on it, like this Onwa KM8C does, so you can direct connect a transducer onto it. If, for instance, you purchase one of the chart plotters like the KM8 or the KM8A that doesn't have a transducer port on it, you can add an external module. So Onwa calls that the KM-Sonar N module. It'll be an external black box module that will then allow you to plug a transducer into it to get depth and fish finding. So what is Sonar and what does it do for you? Well, like I mentioned, you'll get the depth and fish finding ability with it. So what it requires is you to mount a transducer on the boat, and there's various types of transducers depending on the type of boat you have, and it's typically determined by the engine setup. So if you have a boat with an outboard or inboard outboard, transom mount transducers would be perfect for that. If you have a fiberglass boat, then you can do an in-hull transducer where there's nothing you need to externally mount on the boat, so that means no holes below the waterline or nothing to damage if you hit an object. You can actually epoxy your transducer inside the hull. It will shoot the signal through the fiberglass and then allow you to get that depth and sonar reading. Well, a lot of manufacturers make specific in-hull transducers. You can actually take a transom mount transducer like this one, especially one that has a flat bottom surface like this, and epoxy it directly in the hull. Now, if you have a boat that has props that are in front of the transom, like inboards for example, you can't mount a transducer behind them because you'll have too much turbulence and air bubbles, and transducers aren't going to read through air, they're just going to read through the water. So what we would do in that case is use a through-hull transducer. With a through-hull transducer, we cut a hole in the bottom of the boat, the diameter of the transducer, which is usually 2 inches. The transducer and cable are then fed up through. This nut would then be cinched down to compress it tight up against the hull, and marine sealant would be used to create a waterproof seal. This will allow you to get the transducer in front of those props to maintain a clean flow of water over the face of the transducer while your boat's underway. So Onwa makes a few different types of transducers for their sonar displays. You can get the through hulls like I've talked about in plastic or in bronze. So depending on the composition you need for the type of boat and the type of waters you'll be in, you're able to select that from Onwa. They also make the transom mount transducer, and like I say, you can epoxy those transom mount transducers in the hull on a fiberglass boat if you choose. And then depending on what model MFD you have, if you have the C model like I do, it'll direct connect plug right into the back of the unit. If you have one of the other models, then you need that Sonar black box module we spoke about. The transducer will plug into that, and that will process all the information, and then that will send everything over to the display, so it'll be displayed just the same way. In my opinion, sonar is definitely something anybody who's boating needs. Whether you're fishing, sailing, or just on a pleasure boat, it's always good to know the true depth below the hull of the boat and not rely on the charts itself in order to give you that information. The unit's also able to tell you the bottom density. So if you're going into an anchorage and want to determine if you have mud or rock on the bottom, you're able to do that based on the color that you're seeing on the sonar screen. As I mentioned earlier in the video, Onwa Marine Electronics is the sponsor of the video, and you may not have heard of them before, but if you're looking for a new chart plotter, I definitely encourage you to take a look at their website and see the products that they have to offer. They're a company that's been around since 1999 and it's got their start selling CB radios for boats. They've since moved to a full line of marine electronics, as you can see from being covered in this video. So be sure to take a look at Onwa Marine Electronics website when you're shopping for electronics next time. Radar is the next thing I want to cover in this video, and it's actually probably one of the least confusing when you start talking about it, because there's really only one term people use to describe that, and it is radar. So just like sonar is your eyes below the water, radar is your eyes above the water. And it's basically anytime you have low visibility, you want to have a radar. So that could be if you boat in areas that are susceptible to fog, if you boat at night, or even if you're boating into a glaring setting sun and you just can't see because of all the glare. The radar will show you objects above the surface of the water, such as marker buoys, other vessels, land masses, or even just floating debris. Radar also allows you to set a guard zone anywhere around your vessel. So you can make that as wide or as narrow as you want, and typically you'd have that ahead of your boat. So as you're traveling, anything that comes into that guard zone will sound an alarm. The one downside to radar is it does require one of the largest accessories you have to mount on your boat in the form of the ray dome or open array radar. Onwa offers a couple different models of radar domes that can be mounted on a radar arch on the boat, and they also have an open array with their KRA series of radars. So in order to mount a radar on the boat, you typically do need a larger vessel which has a hard top or a radar arch like I mentioned. The information from the radar is then fed down through a cable to a router, which can then be tapped into the Ethernet network that would then go to the Onwa display. So typically the performance difference between the radar dome and the open array is the distance it will travel. The radar domes are a little bit wider of a beam angle, so they're going to be better for close range targets. If you need to look very far away, that's where the narrower beam angle on the open array will be better suited for you. If you have the room for a radar on your boat, I highly recommend adding that as an accessory for those times when you may have that limited visibility. While radar can help you see any vessel on the water, there's another way you can see vessels as well on your Onwa display, and that's through AIS. AIS stands for Automatic Identification System, and this is actually a newer type of technology that's now being offered and almost becoming commonplace among recreational boaters. A lot of areas that have commercial traffic require commercial vessels to output their position through this digital signal. This will work on similar bands to VHF marine radio, and oftentimes you're able to use your VHF antenna through a splitter to then display the AIS targets on your chart plotter. Of course, for this to work, the vessels around you need to be sending that signal with an AIS transmitter. And while a lot of commercial vessels are required to do this in certain areas, pleasure boats usually are not, but it is gaining a lot of popularity among pleasure boaters. With AIS, you have two options. You can receive, which would just allow you to see where other vessels are, or you can get a transceiver, which will allow you to transmit and receive. So you'll be able to transmit your position that any boat with a AIS receiver will be able to see you on their chart. So here I have an example of AIS targets being displayed on the plotter screen. Our vessel is indicated there by the red dot, and then these other AIS vessels are around us. So we can move our cursor over top of those and then get that information about that vessel. Now this is just a simulator. I'm not actually looking at a live vessel right now, but it'll give you all the information that's seen here when you're out on the water. You'll be able to see a vessel's speed, their position, the course that they're heading. That can all help you as you're navigating through heavily traveled commercial waters. Now, another cool thing with AIS is if you have a transceiver on your boat, this allows you to have friends and family keep track of your position. Now, I understand a lot of people wouldn't want that, but for people taking larger trips like doing the Great Loop, for example, you can send your friends and family to marinetraffic.com and they'll be able to see your position on their computer screen. This allows them to keep track of where you are if you plan on meeting up or just for interest's sake. Now, we touched on the various versions of the KM series, and like I said, this is the KM8C, which doesn't have any AIS ability to it. If I were to buy the KM8A, that would then give me all the AIS functions built right in, and I just have to connect an AIS antenna to it. But I wouldn't have any sonar functions, so I would have to require that Sonar black box module. So in my particular case here, I've got the KM8C, which, as I've mentioned, has just the sonar module, no AIS port on it. What I can do is buy the KM200A, which is an external black box module for AIS. That will then allow me to have my sonar with my transducer plugged directly into the unit. Then I can network in the KM200A and get all my AIS information as well. I think I've mentioned networking a few times in this video, and with our MFDs, we'll actually just set up a network similar to the way we would at home. We would have a Wi-Fi router, computer, and then a whole bunch of devices connected to this. Well, that's the same thing we're going to be doing on the boat. we're going to have our MFD display, we might have a radar antenna plugged into it, and we may have other modules plugged in through networking. There's three popular types of networks out there today. The first and the oldest and really the least used today is NMEA 0183. This has been replaced by NMEA 2000. Both of these networks are industry standard networks from NMEA. This will allow manufacturer A to work with manufacturer B and vice versa. So we can take a GPS antenna from manufacturer A, hook it up to a MFD from manufacturer B, and still have all the information that we would if they were from the same brand. NMEA 0183 was just bare wire connections. There was no connectors on them. We had a transmit, receive, ground as a very simple setup. There was no color coordination among that. So manufacturer A could have a transmit wire that was yellow, and manufacturer B, a receive wire, was blue. So you would never hook yellow to yellow or blue to blue because it just wouldn't work. You have to go transmit to receive. So it got very confusing. NMEA 2000 then came out with much more standardized wiring. And the benefit with NMEA 2000 as well, there was a standard 5-pin plug that has been adopted through the industry. This Onwa chart plotter has one of those plugs right on the back of it. So we're able just to plug into the NMEA 2000 network on the boat with any device we want to add, and then it shares seamlessly and very quickly. The downside with NMEA 2000 is it's a very low bandwidth networking. So it's able to share digital data like we see on the side of the screen here, like position or depth from a transducer, just like literally numbers, and that's basically it. As far as video sharing like radar or sharing charts between two units or sharing sonar, it's not capable of doing that. And the other downside to NMEA 2000 is you can hook it up wrong very easily. There is a standard network architecture that must be followed. So unless you're trained in it, it can be a little bit difficult to do yourself. Now I said there was three types of networking, and I've covered two of them with NMEA 0183 and NMEA 2000. The other one is Ethernet, and this is a newer type of networking that we're seeing adopted into the MFDs. This allows us to share video. So we're able to share radar, and in this particular case, if we were to add one of the KRA radar domes to this Onwa plotter, it would plug in through the Ethernet port on the back of the unit. But because Ethernet is so much higher bandwidth than the other NMEA networks, we're able to share other information through those networks as well. So when you're looking for a chart plotter, you definitely want to take a look at what networking options are available and then what you can add into that network down the road. That's kind of the beauty of all this networking today, is we can buy the MFD to start out to get our GPS position and maybe a transducer for sonar depth. But then we want to add things down the road, we're able to do that through the network. And in most cases, it's just simply plugging in that new device to the network, and then we'll see it on our display. One of the last things I wanted to touch on in this video is a unit that Onwa makes called the KM8X. Now the X model has all the functions built into it. So not only do we have a sonar port on it, we also have an AIS port. We have GPS, we can plug radar into it. We have all the networking abilities on that unit as well. What you can really do with this KM series is customize what you need. So when you're looking at MFDs, always make sure you're looking at those different options that are available for that particular series of units. And then the other thing, Onwa also makes a KM12 in the same sub-variations. So a KM12C will have a transducer port, a KM12A will have AIS, and the KM12X will get you everything you need. And that's available on the 12-inch screen unit. So with that, what you want to do is decide what you need up front and then what you can add down the road. If you don't see any reason to add AIS, all you need is sonar and GPS, then the KM8C, for example, would be fine for you. If you think you're going to add everything eventually, then you're probably going to want to look at the KM8X model. I've covered a lot in this video of the different variations of these Onwa chart plotters, and hopefully explaining these different terms to you will help you understand better when you're purchasing electronics. I also have another video, which you can take a look in this card above, on how to purchase marine electronics. So I'd highly recommend you check that one out as well. So I think think that's a rundown on the basic terms you're going to run into when you're shopping for your marine electronics. If you have any other questions or need further clarification on anything, definitely use the comments below and I'll be sure to answer those for you. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video on the In-Depth Sonar YouTube channel. Really hope you do subscribe and like the video if it helped you out.